Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt with Tim and Brock. Our guest today is Austin Lieberman. Austin was a tactical air control party officer in the Air Force from 2011 to 2018. We followed up with a couple of years in the National Guard. Since then, he's worked for Slalom as a consultant, a career coach at Lambda School, a lead advisor at Seven Investing, as well as Common Stock and Substack, and now works for Social Capital. Austin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Only comment is you should probably change the name of this entire thing to something more Air Force oriented, there's enough Navy stuff going on already. We don't care about that.
Just be aware that, right. I will absolutely throw every dig I can at the Air Force moving forward.
just for so that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm used to it. There's a lot of jealousy out there.
Oh gosh, it's already starting.
I didn't think that we were going to be getting this from you.
Yeah. I was totally normal when we were having a conversation beforehand. Yeah, in all seriousness, thanks for having me. Excited about what you guys are doing. And, I think the audience out there, whether they're still serving, did serve, never served, have family members that have served, potentially hiring veterans, or transitioning. I think like content and podcasts like this, channels like this can be super helpful for that stuff, whether you just like need to hear some of these stories, or maybe you're going through some of this transition stuff. It can all be like kind of big and scary and also lonely at times. So yeah, this is cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
That's very true. I think that there is a very large unserved niche in the kind of military space in general, at least when it comes to content. So we're hoping to fill that. So a little bit about you. You kind of told us here beforehand, you were, I'm going to use TAC-P because that title is a bit of a mouthful. Did you join the Air Force to do that? What was the lead up to that? And talk a little bit about filling that position.
Yeah, no, I didn't join the Air Force to do that. So I... We can go all the way back.
Let's start with from the beginning. Yeah, let's start with like the origin story. Like, I guess why you joined and then lead into that.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was younger, I played baseball my whole life growing up, very competitively, to the point where even through high school, the goal was to, play high level Division I, potentially even get drafted, which is a lot of probably like people's goals at that point, right? And a lot of times it's unrealistic. In middle school, I got hit with a line drive. I was playing on like a high school travel team, and we were playing home run derby before practice one day. And this kid, he was in like ninth grade. I think I was in sixth or seventh, or maybe he was in eighth grade. Didn't hit any home runs, and he threw a ball up and hit it. And I was pitching, and because he had finished his round, we were all like picking the balls up, and I was going to go in and hit. And so I wasn't even looking. And the next thing I know, there was just like a line drive coming straight at my face, and it hit me kind of like right here in the head, which you can see there's an awesome dent and scar. And so that it fractured my skull. I had internal bleeding, had to go to the hospital, got flown in a helicopter to Arnold Palmer in Orlando, and ended up having surgery to drain the blood. And so that thing happening like kind of set things in motion later in life, or I guess like maybe led to outcomes later in life that probably would have never happened. It's just like funny how that stuff works, right? And so I ended up being okay, went back to playing baseball. It's weird. I was a right-handed hitter, right? Which means you're standing, if you're like looking at the pitcher, you're standing in the box on the left side, which means that the left side of your body is facing the pitcher. And that's the side where I got hit. And so I tried not to be scared or afraid, but I think like subconsciously, maybe it did impact me later on and throughout. And like, who knows if that had an effect on like performance and stuff like that. But so fast forward, starting college, I started my freshman year in college at a private school on a 50% scholarship. But it 2 days before we broke for like Christmas break or the fall break, or maybe it was like a week before, I got a note from the registrar's office that none of my tuition had been paid. And what happened was, my parents didn't want me to have to work, and they, wanted to figure out a way to pay for the other 50%. But it was a private school and I was out of state. And so they were just unable to pay for it and like arrange the finances. And so without even talking to them, I just decided that it was going to put my parents in too much debt. And I packed all my stuff and I left the school that it never went back after Christmas break or the fall break. And so went back home, we did Christmas and stuff. And then I started the rest of my freshman year at the local community college because it was too late to enroll in like any universities or anything. So I worked, saved some money. And this was back in Vero Beach, Florida, or Sebastian, Florida. And then I applied to the University of Central Florida to start my sophomore year. And I shared all that because all the prior stuff leading up, because it's just like things totally, you just never know how things are going to turn out. Right. And so I was at UCF, tried to walk onto the baseball team there, hadn't been playing for like 6 months really. And that didn't work out. And then I was just like left in this situation where I had played sports my whole life and didn't really know how to just be like a random student on a campus or number or whatever. And so I needed something to like feel like I had a purpose or whatever, or like I was working towards something. And there's a program called Reserve Officer Training Corps. I guess if you're listening to this, you probably know what that is. So I started Air Force ROTC at the University of Central Florida my sophomore year of college after never having any military exposure. The only exposure I had, my grandfather was in World War II, and then I had some like distant uncles and stuff. My girlfriend, my senior year of high school, got recruited to the Air Force Academy, and I learned about the military and the Air Force Academy and thought it was kind of cool, and like sort of like ran with her a little bit as she got ready to go. And obviously I beat her in all the run. No, I'm just kidding. But that was my only exposure to, potentially becoming an officer, that, hey, there's this other course than just being a student in college, and you might have some options.
So this was a class. I guess when I think of like ROTC, I think of like you go and you're, I don't know if you go to boot camp first and then come back to that, or what was that process like?
So I had this thing in my head where it's like in high school, I just kind of like made fun of all the ROTC kids and the junior ROTC kids in high school, right?
Flinging rifles around and stuff.
If you're in JROTC in high school, that's really cool. I'm not making fun of you. But honestly, I knew nothing about it. Right. But yeah, in college, you can essentially, it's an extra course a semester, and you take the class, and that's where you learn like kind of the academics and the military study and history and leadership classes and stuff like that. And then in addition to that, you have whatever the requirements are for that program. And so for us, there was like after school stuff, and then on we had PT in the mornings, physical training. So most college kids are like hungover and sleeping in, and we were up at 6 or 7 in the morning working out 4 days a week. And not all of them are necessarily the best workouts or whatever, because it's a bunch of Air Force college kids, but still, if you wanted it to be serious, it could be. And you just learn sort of like sacrifice and dedication, even starting with that. And then on Thursdays, I think it was Thursdays, there was this thing called Leadership Lab, which was that was also in the mornings, because we had PT 4 days a week and then Leadership Lab on Thursdays. And that's where you learn like how to march and stuff like that. And so essentially you do that for like 2 years or 3 years. Then you go to field training, either like, generally your junior year of college. No, it's between your sophomore and junior years. And after field training, that's where it's like you get a little bit more committed. You potentially sign a contract or whatever to then commit to doing your first 4 years or whatever. I might have some of that stuff off, but yeah, it's additional training essentially to get you ready. And then essentially you graduate or you commission, what job you're going into. And then you commission directly as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. And so, back to the original question, did I know what I was going to do? you can generally, you find out your senior year, if you're going to go into like kind of like the general jobs where you put in what your preferences are, and then there's like, you either get it or you don't. That might be like, I don't know, legal or other stuff. And then there's certain things that are sort of like special applications. And so one of those things is like being a pilot. And then there's other jobs. And for me, I wanted to be a combat rescue officer, which if you've heard of like PJs or pararescuemen, combat rescue officer is the officer career field, pararescueman is the enlisted career field, same general function. You apply, and then you go to a special selection process. So it was a week-long selection at Fairchild in Washington. I don't know if it's still there or not. This is in 2010 that I went. And I went over spring break my junior year. Ended up getting selected from that, which is like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10% of people that like start the application process actually like make it through the week and get selected. And so I also had a pilot slot, which I turned the pilot slot down after I accepted the Crow contract. And so my job leaving ROTC was to be a combat rescue officer. That requires 2 to 3 years of training. And I failed a swim at the beginning of that training, which essentially forced me to either, I was going to either be like forced out because I had lost my job, or I had to retrain and go into a different career field. I didn't want to go to like a normal Air Force job. And so the TAC-P officer was another semi-related or like operational type role that kind of aligned with like the intentions that I already had to do. I wanted to like test myself and, see if I could even do it. Like I was a horrible swimmer and didn't even know if I could make it through that training initially for the Crow stuff. Cause there's like water confidence, there's lots of running and swimming, all that stuff. And so I just liked the challenge. I liked the idea of like doing more, and I was young and healthy and wanted to see if I could do it,
Did that kind of take the wind out of your sails? Failing out of that?
Yeah, I was devastated. I literally like was in tears after. I mean, when you fail that, that test, they took all the students. So there's this weird thing, like there was a standard that changed, which I should have been ready for it anyways. I hadn't trained under the standard that I needed to be in that one area, which is a major lesson learned. Like never be as good as a standard. Like you need to be better than the standard because things are going to change. And you got to be ready for that. But like 45 or 50% of our class failed that swim. And then afterwards, it's like you meet with all the instructors and stuff, and then they figure out like, hey, you're going home or whatever. And I was like devastated. I was absolutely devastated because by that point I had trained for 5 years to get ready for that point. Like that was in 2012. And I started training in 2008, essentially. So 4 years. And I was at UCF. And so I found out about this whole career field because I had connected with somebody that was a PJ in Vietnam. His name's David Milston. And he was on this historical mission where Pitzenberger, who's a Medal of Honor recipient, I think he was a Medal of Honor recipient. And there's a movie that came out about him like last year. I forget the name of it. But he was on that mission, and he helped us do some like ropes courses in ROTC. So I learned about the career field. And then there was a rescue squadron in Cocoa, which is like an hour away. And I called over there because it was hard to figure out like, okay, what were the requirements for this career? It was a brand new career field. So it's hard to figure out what the requirements were. And then there was a lot of like underwater stuff, like buddy breathing and mask and snorkel recoveries and underwater swimming that's like really dangerous to do. And I had no idea how to do it. And I guess this is another lesson I learned early on is it's like, if you want something, you find a way to like learn it and go do it. And you show that you want it. Right. And so I just called around and got ended up talking to like a recruiter at Patrick Air Force Base in Cocoa, and then talked to some of the Crows and PJs there. And they were like, yeah, we have guys training for this, so you can come out. And I spent like 3 weeks driving there every day and doing and training with them. And this was over like a break in college. I think it was like either spring break or Christmas or something. And instead of like going home, I went there and did that. And and then from then on, I trained all the time for it, right? Because I knew what I needed to get ready to do. And there was, long runs and all this stuff. And so I had literally dedicated, 4 years of my life to trying to train for this thing. And then I fail out of it. And it was like my identity was associated with it. And you just have like a lot of sunk costs and sunk emotion. And then, but ultimately, once I got over that, I realized I should have trained better and been more prepared, and I wasn't. And that there was still opportunities to go do some other cool stuff. And the TACP or Air Liaison Officer career field got changed over to TACP officer. It was a really cool thing. And then ended up doing that my whole career from 2011 to 2018, and then even in the National Guard. And like I was devastated at first, but like I couldn't have landed in a better spot and met better friends and teammates and had opportunities to do like more amazing things. So yeah, then that was another 2 years of training, essentially, because you go through all the tech school, survival school, joint firepower course, a number of other courses, and then ultimately like go to your squadron, get the training there. And then at that time, it was like, after that, it was like the standard was like you deploy. And so I deployed in 2015. But yeah, I just like jumped all around. I don't know, essentially, no, I didn't know I was going to do that. Screwed up really bad, but then ended up in a good spot.
Yeah, that ball you got hit in the head with must have hit you pretty hard to keep you coming back for more after all that, because that's pretty impressive, man. Like, get back up and keep playing baseball, and then also keep on the course after failing out. I think that's pretty respectable.
You said something about you'd kind of like you'd been training for this moment for, it sounds like, years. And then you tied your identity to it, and you were devastated, which makes sense. I don't know how many people, when Brock and I were in our A school in Pensacola, Florida, how many buds dropouts do you think were there? I mean, all these guys on the enlisted side, they'd join the Navy to be a Navy SEAL, go to buds, drop out, and then, either fail a test or whatever. And then now they're like, okay, you got to pick something else. And then they would either go rescue swimmer or, maintainer or something like that. And it just seems like all of those guys had such a chip on their shoulder when they got there. I mean, when they first would get there, it just seemed like the biggest assholes, for lack of a better term. And then you start talking to them, and that was the exact situation. They had tied so much into this training and so many years training to go be a Navy SEAL, and then they either fell a swim, or a lot of guys would get hurt on a run, that kind of thing. So I've seen it happen a lot, which it's sad, but it sounds like you persevered and everything worked out for the best in that situation. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think, like you said, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, I think that you made a good point about how the top of the funnel for physical fitness for some of those programs, they kind of advertise as, oh, you just need to be able to run 1.5 miles in 12:30 and do 6 pull-ups. But if you really want to survive and be competitive, you got to be doing double that, probably.
I think it's 15:30 for the Air Force, though.
Yeah.
That's 7 a.m. PT. It's brutal early.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't have to brag to you guys about how awesome in shape I was, but no, there was an interesting dynamic, and I think they've like figured some of this out, but like, you've got two ends of the spectrum, right? It's like the recruiters are incentivized because they got to get like these numbers in and hit, their ratings were based on this stuff. And so it's like, they had to get as many as many people as possible in, and then because they know the attrition's high, but then the attrition is probably extra high because the quality of people coming in aren't quite ready or whatever. And so, but they needed that many people because of the attrition number. So it was like this, like what comes first, the chicken or the egg, or how does the chicken cross the street, whatever that saying is.
You had it right the first time.
But but yeah, it was tough. And so yeah, you have the paper standard, but then you have the other stuff, and like some of it was not always public because maybe they didn't want candidates being able to like train for it, or didn't necessarily want some of that stuff getting out there because public perception of it might not be the best, when really like the intent was good, it was the right way, but it's like nobody would understand, you know. So yeah, that was definitely a thing where it's like a lot of people, maybe myself included, but like I think I was educated enough to know like, hey, what the real standards were. I just didn't get there in the swim, which is like it was a strategic mistake on my part. Honestly, like I thought I was good enough there, and so I trained in other areas like the underwater stuff, which is what usually gets everybody in the swim. Literally, the swim that I failed on, you do it one time your entire like career there. And I was like, I got it, I'm good. And that's not like, you do it and get past it and then move on. But yeah, there's a lot of people that go through that training that like should have never been there in the first place because like they just wanted to do it to look cool for their girlfriend or whatever.
Was it like a distance, like a certain amount of distance you had to swim, or like what did the swim look like?
Yeah, I mean, so it was a 500 meter swim, and it was like the time standard for the class, the previous classes was like 11 minutes and 30 seconds. And this is with no fins or anything. It was and wearing like a mask and clothing basically. Oh
wow.
And then with us, I think it changed to 10:30 or 10:40 or something like that, starting with our class. And we found out the day of the test that was the time. And again, like I'm making excuses at this point, right? Because it's like, if I would have passed, I would have passed, but I didn't. And I failed along with a lot of other people. But yeah, I think that's what it was a long time ago. So I don't exactly remember now, but yeah.
So what is, so you do that, and then now you transition into being TAC P. What does that job look like? Like what's a day-to-day life in a TAC P officer?
Yeah. So at first, the first couple years, you're really just in training, right? And going through the training, whether it's tech school, or a couple of the different courses you go to, you're in like you can call it like team leader position where there might be 2 or 3 officers at the course. And then you've got a team of maybe 45 or 50 enlisted personnel. And, you know, your job is there's obviously instructors and stuff there, but your job is to kind of help like lead the team and help mentor and sometimes it's like physically get people through these courses. And then you're also kind of like if you hear my kids screaming, just tell me. And
I get it. No, you're fine.
Yeah. And so there's that aspect of it. And then once you're done with the training, you get to your squadron, and there's more training. So essentially like your rank at that point doesn't matter. You're just in the training pool of the people that got there and need to essentially get like mission qualified. Right. And so there's like tactical level training, a bunch of radio stuff. There's academic training. Got to get trained on the vehicles, on the weapons and everything like that. And so, yeah, the first few years are just really training. And it's like the tactical stuff you need to be deployable for the job. And then as you get to say the captain level, which is after 4 years in the Air Force, you're kind of like done with all of your mission qualification training. Maybe you've deployed once, and then you're either like an assistant flight commander, which is a flight is, 30 people on active duty. Or you become a flight commander, and that's where you're responsible for a flight. You oversee their training. You've obviously got like an enlisted chief of the flight that is like the tactical expert and who helps make sure everybody's hitting their tactical milestones and does like that type of mentorship. And you just work together to make sure that the flight is hitting all their training milestones. And then everybody does a little bit different, but essentially the idea is that flights would deploy together. It hasn't exactly been that way just because of like how a lot of the deployments went, where we were just sending 1, maybe 3 guys at a time. Yeah. And then, so you do that. And then once you're done with your kind of flight commander time, you just move up to more managerial or administrative type roles in the squadron, where you might be a director of operations, assistant director of operations, where you're kind of like overseeing training and readiness for the entire squadron versus just your flight. So standard, probably pretty standard to any job. It's just there's the cool thing we get to do is just like, which is also hard, is you just go TDY a lot and you get to do a lot of really cool training with fighter squadrons and fighter jets, and essentially like going out on ranges or out in the middle of nowhere, and doing close air support training, which can be fun. Like there's these things called military operations areas, MOAs, where planes are authorized to fly over. They're obviously not allowed to have like any type of ordnance on them whatsoever. But they're just these like rural areas. And so be driving around in trucks, like in cities on radios, talking to trains or talking to planes overhead, doing like simulated type training and
pretty cool.
Finding simulated targets that obviously there's no real ammunition here. None of that is real, but it's all, you can talk to them, and based on what they can look down and see and what you can see, you're practicing the steps that you would have to do if you were in that real situation to conduct close air support.
So you guys I imagine you've got a bunch of computers and you're looking at coordinates and all of these things. And then you guys are telling the planes or the jets or whoever, hey, this is what the target is. And are you guys actually giving the weapons release authority for that?
Yep. That's kind of like the big responsibility that so if you hear the word JTAC or Joint Terminal Attack Controller, that's the big responsibility that they have. And what you go through all the training for is ultimately to be that clearance authority to actually give the aircraft the verbal clearance over the radio for them to drop their munitions. And there's other situations where like a JTAC might not be required, but yeah, that was essentially our job. And so everything up to that point, the planning is knowing where, if you're deployed in the Middle East, like knowing where civilians are, knowing where friendlies are, knowing where the enemy is. And there are times where that's done from like an operations center. So you're in like at a base of some sort and have tons of computers around you and all those resources. But there's also times where people do it out either in some type of armored vehicle, or when we were in training, we were just like driving around in trucks where literally you have like a radio and maybe some devices like GPSs and rangefinders that you can figure out where something is located, either by getting like GPS coordinates or by like seeing it, and then the pilot also seeing it and saying, yep, that's a target. The friendlies are here. We know you see us. And there's things you do that just make sure that it's like safe, where you verify back and forth kind of. But yeah, that's the job essentially. It's a lot of fun, and it's dangerous too, which is also interesting and fun. And just a lot of stories, like a lot of, fun stuff out TDY, like speeding across ranges and like trying to get to places on time and like getting stuck out in the desert, all this stuff that's like fun, but also kind of miserable.
The best, worst time of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I like to say.
Yep.
I'd imagine that there's a lot of, it sounds like you guys are going through a lot of the verification process of figuring out, verifying, hey, this is what it is. How much judgment is being exercised in a position like that? What is the Is there anything where like, hey, this is a gray area, but I need to make a decision about what this is?
Yeah, I mean that's like most of the job is it's never, I don't want to say never, but like most of the time it's not just like very, very obvious, especially in those dynamic type situations where maybe on the ground you're moving and there's like uh, simulated friendly positions, like maybe they simulate that there's like another convoy moving into a friendly convoy moving in the area or something like that. It's hardly ever was it like very like binary, super obvious that like, yep, that's target, nobody's nearby. You always have to think through things. And I mean, we have all kinds of checklists and safety procedures that like, I don't want to bore anybody and go into like details about all that stuff, but there are checks and balances between the controller on the ground, plus the aircraft, plus anybody else that's monitoring or listening to make sure like, hey, those coordinates that you gave look like they're in the right spot. And at least you and the pilot think that you're talking about the same thing, which is important. And then confirming that the
Generally,
confirming that the thing you're actually talking about is a target, because you also have to make sure of that. And then checks and balances to make sure, hey, there's no friendlies that are too close, there's no civilians that are too close. And it can all move really fast sometimes and be really hard. But then you fall back on kind of like the basic fundamental level of training that you have, as well as the tools that you have that are in place to help you like get through those situations and make those good decisions. And like a lesson is just like, it's really easy for people to want to go do all the cool stuff and forget about the fundamentals, or it's really easy when things get going crazy to get away from your process or the checklist or whatever and try to skip steps. And when you skip those steps and take shortcuts is when mistakes happen. And even in training, I mean, there are training accidents that happen sometimes where people do get injured and sometimes die in training. And so it's super serious, even when you're just in training, which is like part of the stress, but also the fun of the job is it's like a huge responsibility. And then, yeah, I mean, the opportunity to deploy and then go do your job deployed is kind of like what everybody does it for, right? Which it sounds weird, but when you train that long for something and like that's the mindset that you're in, even though deployments can be really hard, it's like that's what you want to go do because there's all these people that have gone before you and done it, and you hear like stories of the legends, and you just want to kind of like do your part essentially.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that is instilled in the military very, very early on about deploying and being put to work. I don't know. I don't know. Tim, did you feel that at all?
Yeah, I I think it starts right in boot camp, at least from the enlisted side, and I'm sure that it's the same from the officer side. Um, but yeah, that is definitely implemented right away. And then, so for me personally, I was in the Navy. They call it shore duty right off the jump. So I went to a training squadron where their whole mission was training rescue swimmers and pilots. So I worked on helicopters. I was an avionics technician. And so that squadron's entire mission was to train rescue swimmers and pilots. And you were talking about how people in training, there's accidents that happen in training. People get hurt and die. I remember this is just a training squadron, and nobody really thought anything of it, but it was super eye-opening to me. I was out at lunch with my wife, who I think she was my girlfriend at the time, and I got a text message from my chief, and he was basically like, "Hey, don't say anything to anybody. We had a bird go down. Get in here as soon as you can. Stay off of social media." So I remember just looking at my wife being like, a helicopter crashed and I have to get in, and and so your heart is just racing the entire time, especially for from a maintainer standpoint, because I'm the one who works on those helicopters, and all I'm thinking of is, did I mess something up? Like, am I the reason? So Anyway, yeah, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent, but yes, I would agree with you for sure.
Yeah.
I kind of am curious from your perspective. Something that I personally, I guess, have been grappling with is, so when I started out and was trying to join up with the Navy, I took a very similar job as Tim, a maintainer for jets and helicopters. But I was really trying for like a spec war contract. I wanted to be EOD more than life itself, and I had a very similar eye-opening experience about the swim and what that looked like. So that it was funny to hear your story about that. But I think that when it comes to that kind of fulfilling that higher mission, I think that there are times where part of the deploying or getting out and maybe not having felt like you did everything that you could, or like maybe that you should have done more, or like or spent more time in, or anything like that. Have you ever experienced anything like that, or felt anything like that while you were on your deployment? I know you said you deployed to Kuwait one time.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think that's something that, I mean, especially, and I'll just speak from like personal experience in the career field I was in, where joined a career field that was like, had guys, and I say guys because at the time, this is like back in, the early 2000s. It I think like being a male, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but it was only a male career field. For whatever reason, they just had those requirements in their career field. And so when I say guys, that's why I'm saying guys. But having guys that had played a key role in like the invasion in Iraq, and then through Afghanistan and all this, and just like the stories you hear and the things that they did. And then also like the guys that were lost, right? Like it's part of the greater community. It's like why everybody's there essentially. And so it's like you want to get your training done, you want to go deploy, right? And our time frame was like there were definitely still deployments, but you had to meet, like, to go do certain types of deployments, you had to be fully JTAC qualified, which took, that could take 4 years sometimes just because of the amount of time it takes. And then there was like people volunteering. And so, and essentially it's like, you put your name down, you say, yep, I'm going to be done with my training in that window, and I'm volunteering for deployment in that window. And you kind of like get what comes, right? And it sounds weird, but it's like when the people that got the, the hot deployments are the ones that, it was going to be action. It's like, they're kind of looking forward to that. I mean, it could be really challenging and dangerous. And like, I don't want to celebrate that at all, but it's like, that's why you do this training and go through these jobs, because you want to go do that. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, I had a little bit longer of the whole, like the training pipeline, because of having to transfer from Crow and starting there and having to then go through more training as a TACP officer, an ALO, which is what it was called, career ALO at the time. Sort of like put that delay on my career. And then I volunteered for the deployment. And then it's just like the one that came down was this deployment to Kuwait. And it was essentially, we were there as like a response force, right? Where we were not deploying directly to, we'll call it like a combat area, but there was a chance that if they needed additional people or an additional squadron or whatever, it's like we were the closest ones there. We were the either whole team or individuals that would go. And it turned out like that's not what happened when my deployment. And so my deployment, I was it was called the partnership ALO. And so my job was, it was awesome. Like I had a great time. It was to go around and help some of our partner nations. So Jordan, the UAE, the UK, France, Belgium, and there was a number of other militaries as well. I think Saudi Arabia, Egypt, a number of others, helped them with close air support training. And then some of them were trying to like essentially create JTACs or joint terminal attack controllers of their own, which there's all kinds of requirements and stuff, to really just like help them get to where we could partner with them. And then obviously as the US and our allies, like we want to make them as strong as possible so that in these situations, we have, you know, a good entire team there and it's not just US based. So I got to travel around a lot. Like I spent time in Jordan, in the UAE, and going to these like planning conferences for these exercises. And for these planning conferences, you generally stay at like really nice hotels because they've got to have like enough security and stuff like that. And then the places that have the security, these nice hotels. So I was deployed and I was like getting to go stay at these awesome hotels and go to these planning conferences and like wear a suit and stuff and not a normal deployment by any means. And we had a whole squadron of like 40 guys. And it was like, I mean, we joked about it and everybody like made fun of me for how like easy I had it. But also I tried to find ways that we could bring, you know, a number of people to go to these either different training events or like enjoy some of those niceties instead of sleeping in like the tents that we were sleeping in Kuwait. But I never actually had a combat deployment. And so the reason I started thinking about getting out is because we had a miscarriage in 2000. We had my son in 2015. And in the deployment I had volunteered for, I left 2 months after he was born, or a month after he was born. And I was gone for 7 months. And then after that, we moved bases. We had a miscarriage. That was hard. And then my wife got pregnant with our daughter. And it was after the miscarriage. I found out, and again, there's this weird thing where it's like you can volunteer for deployment, but that doesn't necessarily count against your non-voluntary deployment status because they have certain deployments that are non-voluntary. I ended up like basically being up for a non-voluntary 1-year deployment, and it wasn't going to be like a combat deployment or an operational deployment necessarily. It was going to be another training type of one. And I knew that meant if I wanted to get that like deployed experience that I really wanted, I would have to then come back after a year and then train up and deploy again. And because of what had happened with our family, I just wasn't, and we as a family weren't ready for me to leave again a month after my daughter was born for a year. And then knowing that I would want to deploy again after that. And I was coming up on like the 8-year mark in my career where because our career field was undermanned, they offer like bonuses and you sign this bonus and you commit to another 4 years. That puts you to 12 years. And then it's like, you might as well stay in because you're at 12 years. You might as well just go to 20. And so we just knew as a family, like, hey, this is the time that it makes sense for me to get out if that's what I'm going to do. Fortunately, I had some connections to an Air National Guard squadron that does the same job. And so I ended up joining the Air National Guard and doing that. But to answer your question, like, yeah, that's something I struggled with in the decision to get off of active duty. It was easier because I knew I had this option to join the Air National Guard and still have the potential to deploy and do that job. But it's a decision that I struggle with, like with whether staying in or getting out of the Air National Guard, because still I never ultimately, did a combat deployment. But the thing that I've kind of like settled on, and maybe I'm just settling on this because it's like how it worked out for me, is that even though I didn't directly get to deploy, I still had an opportunity to train with a bunch of people, help mentor, hopefully, and just guide some of our enlisted force who are the real tactical experts, who are the ones that should be out there like on those missions anyways, because they're the ones that's exactly what they train for. Whereas as an officer, it's like, it's important to be tactically oriented and sound, but if that's all you're focused on, then you're not doing kind of what your job as an officer is, which is like making sure that everyone else is taken care of and prepared. So I guess I still look back on it and I'm like, even though I didn't directly do it, I was still a part of that whole movement, helped mentor some guys, and then ultimately was a part of what provided this this capability that the United States Air Force has, which is like joint terminal attack controllers, that whole thing. Like I was a part of that whole thing. And then that whole thing together provides this really important capability and reach for the US military and really the world, in my opinion. And so I guess that's where I settled on, is like, hey, I was there. I would have certainly done it if that was how my deployment worked out, or another one worked out, but it didn't. And I wasn't going to make my wife and our family go through that just because I still wanted that opportunity. But it's definitely hard.
That's definitely that's a tough thing, that especially somebody, I feel like most, at least on the enlisted side, most people join single, and they really don't have any ties. And then once you get to that point where you have either a husband or a wife, and you guys start having kids, and your perspective really changes. And one thing I never realized until probably couple of years after I got out is how hard it is to be gone on your kids, and in my case, my wife. I was out just having fun, working on helicopters, with my best friends, and it's a tough thing. And I feel like anybody with a family, that's usually the main reason why they get out, is it's the best decision for the family. I want to transition into your reserve time. That's something that I did. I got out of active duty, went into the reserve time. Was that kind of shocking for you, transitioning into the reserves? Was it different? Is it everything you thought it would be?
Yeah, the guard that I did is pretty unique, probably. Because I was able to transition directly. They had the exact same job and setup. I mean, they have TAC-P, the exact same thing in the Guard, in the Air National Guard, as they do on active duty. And actually, the Guard squadron that I joined had a reputation of like being far more deployed than any active duty squadron that I was a part of. And that was kind of like by choice. And that's just what they like, the people that join this squadron, like that's essentially like they join knowing that. And a lot of them, when initially I thought about the Guard or the reserve, I was like, that's just part-time, and you do it part-time, whatever. A lot of them put in a lot more time than that because of the training requirements and deployments and things like that. And so a lot of the people at the squadron are like police officers or firefighters or EMTs or whatever. And then those two career fields just go well together because there's a mutual understanding there. It's also really, really challenging because they're super busy and still taken away from their family. But it was an awesome experience. And the thing that's tough though is that I had a civilian job, and so the challenging thing was trying to balance the time requirements of keeping the JTAC qualification and all of that stuff while doing a civilian job. And then at some point I just had to think about like, what is the impact on my civilian career of me missing time and all, so you go through that whole thing. And that was like another challenge in itself. But it was just a great experience, and it allowed me to at least like continue to train. And I didn't get an opportunity to deploy with the Guard squadron just because then my wife was pregnant again, and then COVID happened. My wife is a nurse, and so like she couldn't miss work because there was a whole COVID. So it's just like this, this random thing of events or whatever that happened that like still I didn't get a chance to go do that just because the timing didn't work out. But it was still a good opportunity, and we got to do some like awesome training, like more tactical style training than I got to do in a long time on active duty, because that eventually just turns into more like admin stuff as you move along in the officer ranks. But yeah, so no, not a whole lot of shock there, because I knew like what I was getting into with the Guard for the Air Force.
Yeah, it sounds like that. It sounded like that required a little bit more from you than just the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer. I think that's most people, when they think reserve, they're, go play Army on the weekend and, do whatever. And then you go home at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It sounds like that was a little different?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I did it for like 2 years. And I think I averaged like between 30 and 60 days TDY, which is like off for training in addition to like the 1 weekend a month or whatever, like another probably 30 to 40 days a year of training for the guard, which is tough when you're missing work and stuff.
I know that is a lot. That's ultimately why I ended up getting out of the reserves, is it was taken away from my civilian job. And I started doing the reserves just for the healthcare portion of it. TRICARE, super good, really, really affordable. It sounds like you kind of had a pretty easy time, and it's everything that you had expected. Whereas, at least in my experience, and I don't know if that's because I'm based here in Idaho, but it was a big culture shock. I showed up to my NOSC, or my command, and it was like, what do we do all day? Like what is our, and other than the super high ranking enlisted or officers, the E1 to E5 really just kind of sat around on their phones. And I'm like, I could be making way more money in my civilian job. This is really stupid. So I'm glad that you had that experience, because I did not have that same experience. It was eye-opening.
But that's what you got to think about too, is it's like, if you have a civilian job, then like and it's hard to quantify this because it's hard to know, but it's like, what progression are you sacrificing in your civilian job to go and miss this time? And you might not even know. And then specifically for like the career field I'm in, again, we're like doing this very dangerous task where we're controlling airstrikes potentially. But then in addition to that, just like training can be dangerous too. We do rappelling, we do live shooting, jumping, jumping out of plane, like all different kinds of stuff, right? All of those things can be dangerous. And I didn't feel like I was focused enough. And if I'm just doing it part-time, I felt like I was putting myself in more danger, potentially putting other people in more danger, to where it's like, then ultimately, like, what am I doing it for? And am I putting people, am I taking on too much risk? And then am I actually going to go deploy? And it's like, what impact am I having at that point? And would there be a way to have more impact? Maybe it's some way to give back, or like you guys are doing this podcast or whatever. Like, could I have more impact on the veteran community, spending my time other ways than what I was having in the Guard? Like, that's kind of the point that I got to. And it's like, maybe I'm just thinking way too much about it, but like something I definitely struggle with. And it was hard to like finally accept the fact that I wasn't going to be in the military anymore at all, like
for sure.
After, because when I joined, it's like I was going to do 20 years for sure, no matter what. Like that's what I wanted to do,
Yeah. Well, you're kind of in like this weird state where you're like, you're 1 foot in, 1 foot out. One day I'm putting the uniform on and I'm driving to base, and for me, having flashbacks of being active duty, giving the gate guard my ID and showing up. And then 2 days later, I'm showing up to the office, at my sales job. It's a weird, it's hard to separate them. So I totally get that.
Yep.
So you said you were working while you were in the Guard, like you had kind of a civilian job. What job was that? Like, what did you kind of roll into working wise after you got off of active duty? And like, I guess, what were you sacrificing on that front to go do Guard stuff?
Yeah. And this is like an important topic, right? And so if you are thinking about getting out, or already got out, or know somebody that got out, or potentially hiring veterans or whatever, like this is where I think it's just eye-opening for me. So as like the job I described in the military, essentially like training and conducting airstrikes and close air support. It's like, what does that have? That has nothing to do with anything in the civilian world, right?
Not much real world application.
Right.
Looks good on a resume though.
No, it doesn't. Because it's like, how do you even talk about that? Like, I wasn't going to go interview somewhere and say like, yeah, my job was to call in airstrikes and kill bad guys. And like, I didn't feel comfortable bringing that up in an interview. Because I didn't know like what people thought about the military. I didn't know if I wouldn't have the time to explain all the intricacies and how we made sure, we did the right thing. I wouldn't have time for all that stuff in interviews. And then people were just going to like make snap judgments of me. Right. So I just thought about it, and like, I tried to like learn, and like, this is really where it's like, what really helped me make the transition was, I had started investing in like individual stocks in 2012. And the way I started that was I became a Motley Fool subscriber, and the Motley Fool is this company. I couldn't stand their marketing stuff, but like their actual services were pretty good. And through their services, you learn about investing and following actual businesses. And so, I have a criminal justice degree from college, which is like useless, especially when you did it 10 years ago. And unless I wanted to become a cop or involved in law enforcement, and nothing against anybody like that, the utmost respect for that. But that's not what I wanted to do after transitioning from a job that was like, took me away from home a lot in the military for 10 years, essentially. Fortunately, I was following companies and like had learned about some of these technologies, different businesses, and like just general business speak, right? Which then helped me realize like, all right, how do I think about putting these skills that I have into business terms? I mean, I did do a couple programs that helped me like with the transition experience, but some of them aren't that great. And so you've got to like learn a lot of this on your own, but essentially, you've got to make your job in the military without lying. Like, you've got to make it fit what you want to do in the civilian world. And so the way you do that is you don't have to use exact job titles on like a resume that you had in the military, because nobody's going to understand that. What I did was I had the things that I did and like those functions that I served in. Maybe it was operations manager or consultant or whatever. Those were the titles that I used on my resume as I was transitioning out, not Joint Terminal Attack Controller or Air Liaison Officer or Flight Commander, because no one would understand that. And so I was a consultant at an amazing company called Slalom Consulting, which is like very military friendly, which is like part of how I even got that opportunity in the first place. But what I thought about was like, what am I doing in the Air Force? And essentially my job was to go into all these different organizations. And this is part of that like partnership ALO that I did while I was deployed, right? You have to learn their organizations, learn what their mission is, learn the people, essentially like learn what their product is, right? What are they trying to do? And then be able to implement our mission, which was close air support, into what they were doing. And if you like look into it, that's exactly what a consultant does. You have to go in, meet these teams, understand how they work, and then implement something into their business. Maybe it's a new product, a new piece of software or whatever. And so I had been doing that for like 8 years, and I had all of the kind of like intangible skills. What I didn't have was experience in like the software that they were using. So for example, Salesforce or AWS or whatever. And there's ways that online, like you can go and get some of that training for free. If you just like Google it, Salesforce has free training for veterans. It's called VetForce. You can get some of these certifications, some of this training, and like the specific skills that you need. And then you market and tell recruiters and like orient yourself towards the intangible attributes that you have, or like the experience that you have. And so, yeah, I got into consulting because I somehow convinced them that I had been a consultant. And I got an opportunity to do like a 12-week fellowship while I was still on active duty. And this is where it's like, if you are getting out, make sure you take advantage of the transitions assistance programs, or, I don't know what they're called in the Navy. It's probably some weird made up term. But that's what they call it in the Air Force. So take advantage of that stuff, but then don't rely, like no one's going to care about your transition as much as you. And so you've got to, just like and this is where I like tied it back to, hey, if you want something, go get it and figure it out. So I learned that first trying to train to be a combat rescue officer. And when I had no idea what the requirements were, how to do any of that stuff, I kind of kept that. And I mean, through the military, my job, it's like, you had to have that mindset of learning things and teaching yourself things. And so that's exactly, I apply that same thing to what I did. And what I realized is it's like, yeah, what's written on your resume matters, but what mattered just as much or more is my ability to reach out to people and network, or somebody helping me out that was a veteran that was in one of these places that got me an interview or whatever. Like, if you go do this stuff alone, like you're not going to get very far. So try to find somebody that can help you. And there's, you can find these people on LinkedIn. You can find veterans on LinkedIn at these places. I mean, that's where you got to do a lot of like the self work to figure it out if you want it, and then just go after it and get it. And don't limit yourself. I would have never thought I could be a consultant at this company. So don't limit your potential by like selling yourself short and not even trying because you don't think you're going to get it,
There's a couple interesting things there that you had touched on. The kind of tweaking your resume. I almost said resume. I think that's a really, really good point. Somebody where you can't just put rescue swimmer or avionics technician or whatever. I think looking at the programs that maybe you ran while you were in, were you an avionics technician, or did you run and manage a tool program where they maintained 750 tools at, whatever it may be, and kind of unpacking what you did rather than just the job title. Because as I'm sure all three of us know, your job title in the military it's not all you did.
Yep.
Especially from the enlisted side of it, you're kind of assigned all these different programs. And I'm sure it's the same thing on the officer side, or I know it is because you're talking about them. I think that is huge in being able to, I guess, rename what you did and make it applicable in the civilian world. That's really good advice.
Yeah, the second job I had after being a consultant was, so I did the consultant thing for a year, and it was an awesome experience. I would have stayed there like as long as possible, but I was in Atlanta and we needed to get back to Florida to be closer to our parents, and so ended up like finding a remote job where we could then move to Florida because my wife's mom she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and so spending on that, my parents were having some health stuff, so we needed to be like closer to our parents. And that's like what took priority. The second job I had was I was a career coach at Lambda School, which is like a software development. They teach software development students how to become developers. And I was a career coach, so they offered like career coaching, resume help, interview prep, all this stuff. And I just pulled up my resume from when I applied to that job. So like my jobs in the military, so there was one block, the professional experience was the consultant job I did. And then I had 8 years of military experience or 9 years of military experience at this point. I grouped all of that in like half a page under one title, which was U.S. Air Force Training and Development Team Leader. So again, that's where I took like, okay, what was the job I was applying for and what mattered in that job? Well, the job as a career coach, you need to help train and develop people. And I catered the things I had done in the military without lying. Like I actually did these things. I just renamed them something that was relevant to the job that I was trying to get into. And then the bullets are the, bullets that relate to training and developing people, which anybody in the military has done, right? Because at some point, like that's what you do. So yeah, just kind of hitting home like, hey, if you're going through this, don't put yourself in a box and don't use military terminology on your resume because no one's going to understand it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that going through and making a list of everything that you do or like had done in your time in service, and then trying to like maybe go to somebody that isn't in and trying to read that to them to where that they can understand it, and then have them maybe try and help you with some words or like you said, just translate that into something that what's the practical application of this, and even if you didn't really do anything in your entire time in, you did something, like you said, Tim. You did a lot, whether it seems like it or not.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was pretty fortunate when I, excuse me, when I transitioned from my first squadron to my second squadron and went on to shore duty. I worked with a guy who he'd actually got out, and he was out for a couple months because he was forced out. He didn't make rank in time. And I don't know how he ended up coming back in, but some loophole or something, he was able to rejoin and essentially come right back to the squadron that he had left. So when I decided to get out, he'd already gone through that whole thing. And so he sat down with me for a couple days. And luckily he had the same job as me. and was able to be like, hey, here's my resume, look at how I'm wording it. And so I was able to kind of find a mentor to teach me how to do that. Um, and I'm sure that every command has somebody who's smart enough to able to do it. You just got to ask the questions and find the right people.
Well, and I think that over even just if you do one enlistment or however short a time you're in, you've gone through some situations that are above average. Like they were more difficult than your average day-to-day person has gone through. And so kind of pre-crafting some ideas about when you get that interview question about, tell me about a time that you did something really difficult and you persevered through it. Like whatever, it's the same questions that almost every single place, but you've gone through something at some point in your military time where you can speak to that, and kind of having that crafted up before you start looking for a job, I think is helpful.
Yep. Yeah. 100%. It's all about like preparation and preparing. And then just being ready for like things to change. Just like, same thing that makes you good at your military job or any job is just apply that to interviewing. And the other thing is like, take ownership of the whole thing. And like, again, no one's going to care as much as you. And like, this is like part of the career coaching thing coming in, right? It's like, make it as easy as possible for somebody to hire you. Right. So it's like, don't put any like, don't make it complicated by, or you want to better your chances by like responding to emails in a timely manner, just being professional, like all the small things that you would not think matter. And then like send personalized notes, or, I got in the habit of jobs I applied to. There's a software called loom.com that you can get for free, where you can record a video and put a link to it in an email. And then the person can like play it directly in that email without ever clicking out. And the success rate of like, and again, like you got to be genuine about this stuff, but the success rate of like the jobs I applied to and sent personalized messages that related to like what I had learned studying the company or the person I was like interviewing with or whatever, almost 100%, right? Because it's like very, very rarely does somebody take those extra steps. And if somebody's getting hundreds of applicants, you want to stand out in some way, right?
Yeah, that's ballsy. Just like send a company a personalized video. I can't imagine how powerful that is just from like a hiring standpoint, and to kind of change up and put it into sales terms what you're saying to make it easy for somebody to hire you. In the sales world, we say don't create your own objection. Like don't make it hard for somebody to say no. That's just it. You don't want to create your own objection. You want to make it as easy as possible as you can to have somebody say yes.
Yep.
A little bit ago, speaking of kind of making things easy on yourself, or maybe even before we started recording, you were talking about how networking had kind of led you to some of your maybe early job with slalom, and maybe into some of the roles that you're in now. How do you want to talk a little bit about networking, maybe while you were in the service, how that's changed getting out, and kind of the benefits that you've reaped from that?
Yeah, sure. So I think like some of this has just changed on its own, where it's like the perception is just different now. And it's like totally acceptable or almost expected that even if you're in the military, you have like you're active out there on social media. And like, of course, you got to be mindful of like what you're putting out there, and all that stuff applies. Like you got to remember what you represent. But back in my day, which was only in 2011 to 2017, it just like felt really weird to be active out there on something like a Twitter or an Instagram. It was like, one, I was focused on what I was doing, and it's like, two, it's like, what do I have to say? Nobody needs to hear from me. And then three, it's like I didn't want to like embarrass myself and then have like the people I work with come back and make fun of me or whatever, which probably would have happened. But now I feel like it's generally just more accepted, right? And so it's like you have this decision maker of like, well, how do you use your time or what do you use your account for if you're on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or whatever? And the thing that has like led to far more opportunities than I would have ever expected. And these are opportunities helping a new social investing company called Common Stock, which I did that in this is like 2020. Everything's like blending together in my head. Help them with like some of their initial like launch and growth stuff. I edited a podcast and produced a podcast for a company called Substack, which is like an email newsletter company. I am
now
doing a job that I like never even imagined I would ever have an opportunity to do as a portfolio manager, where I get to invest in public companies, public stocks, as part of social capital. Never imagined having these opportunities. And the way that, those opportunities came was because I got active on Twitter starting in like 2015, 2016, and then got more active as I realized I was getting off and getting off of active duty. And my passion was around investing, because I told you I had started investing in 2012 and it changed our lives. It's what put us in a position to be able to make that decision to get out, is we had saved and invested. And then just like the things I had learned, I started just sharing and trying to document, because I have this big passion around like trying to help veterans and other people just get, spread financial literacy, essentially, because we don't really learn about it in college. And so it was just doing that, and then eventually started an email newsletter and then a podcast of my own, because I thought it was a good way to learn and like a way to pick up some skills, thinking like, no one would really subscribe to it or listen. But if they do, great. But I just learned about like how to do those things. Well, at some point, somebody had been following my newsletter and replied and said, "Hey, we've got this new product in development. Would love you to try it out." And I did. And then that's how I met kind of like the Common Stock team. And then Substack, which is the company that hosts the email newsletter that I write, I saw on their Twitter that they were looking for somebody to edit their podcast. And I replied to that DM. And a lot of times, like the people behind these social media accounts at these startups are the CEO and the founder themselves, because they're a small team. And so, just by being out there on social media and sharing my passion, which was investing, and maybe your passion is something else, not even related to investing. Maybe it's logistics, maybe it's whatever, archery. You can find a community and build up a following and a network. And then through those interactions and then that networking, like that's opened the door to these career opportunities that like I would have never even imagined having. And you can't quantify that. Like you can't say like, I'm going to go look for 10 companies that do what they do. It's just these things that happen that are unexpected through the efforts that you put in building up these followings and putting the time in to network. And then, the specific networking with people, it's like at every place, Slalom, Lambda School, here at Social Capital, I was at 7 Investing. It's like the people behind it are what like really who you meet. And then it's almost like they take like ownership in wanting to help you out or whatever. They get on board and they want to like back you. You got to be a good person. You got to be like genuine about this, but like always put in the extra time to like build those connections. And I guess I valued those connections with people because I knew how important they were in the military, and because people are everything there. And it's like, you're all kind of like family in a way. Well, back to the fellowship I was doing at Slalom, like I think one of the things that helped me get a job there was the interactions I had with the people on the team, because ultimately they then like give you your feedback and that gets fed up through the hiring chain. It was like somebody's birthday, and going up to that, I had like talked to the rest of the team about getting them a birthday card, and we all signed it. And like I was like working on this thing and not feeling like I was really able to offer that much because I was inexperienced. I just like cemented real relationships with these people because I went the extra mile to make somebody like feel happy on their birthday and like sign this birthday card. And it's like, you got to be able to do the job and you got to do a good job. But like, those are the things that people remembered,
Well, and I think like what you said about working and putting stuff out online, there's this whole idea of like learning or kind of like building in public. And so many people use Twitter and like all these social media outlets as like it's a public resume. The things that you're putting out there, the only people that are going to follow you are, your mom and grandma, and then the other people that like those things that you're talking about. And so with enough consistency, you're going to attract over time people that like what you have to say. And so when those things come around, you're maybe front of mind when it comes down to them looking for somebody who can do what you can do.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, again, as long as you're being responsible and remembering what you represent in the military, it's like there's really no downside to getting involved in a passion in your spare time out there on social media and Twitter, and thinking about A, it's a passion, or like B, if it was like me, it's like at the time I knew I was kind of like thinking about getting out. It's like I knew I didn't have a lot of like a business finance degree or anything like that, so it's like, yeah. And then to your point, it's like I likely won't use a resume again, like a formal resume, because I mean, I would love to stay in this job for the rest of my life if I have that opportunity, because it's like I feel so fortunate for it. But like, if I was ever in that situation again, it's like I think I would be able to find some opportunities through, the Twitter following that I've been fortunate to build up, or the email newsletter, or whatever, and it's like, hopefully it doesn't matter. But yeah, it's like that is my resume in my mind at this point.
You've built up a large enough network where enough people know you, where if you do end up looking for a new career path or whatever, people know who you are at this point because you've been doing it for so long.
Yeah, I was at Lambda School in April of 2020 or March of whatever it was. And I got let go from Lambda School because of COVID. And I posted about it on Twitter. And I said, nothing, I've had an amazing time. A lot of the students of Lambda School, because it's like a software development thing, they're active on Twitter and stuff. And I was like, I knew a lot of them, so I had relationships with them. And I just said, hey, if you're a student there, I wish you the best. To the teammates there, thank y'all, I had a great time, all this stuff. And like, I had like 200 or 300 likes and like 100 replies. And a lot of them were people saying like, if you need something, I'm here. If you like, reach out. If you like, so to your point, like, yeah, literally that happened. And I posted about it, and I had an overwhelming amount of support, not only to like make me feel better about myself, but also like professional opportunities. Right. So yeah, that's a super valid point.
How did you know, I guess after Lambda School, is that kind of when you started the newsletter or the podcasting thing, or how did you roll into that? What gave you the traction, or how did you find that success in that?
Yeah, I started the newsletter, and I think I'm pulling it up now. I think it was like 2018.
So you were doing the newsletter before Lambda.
Yeah, I was doing it. I did it pretty much like right when I got off of active duty.
Okay.
And while I was at Slalom, and a lot of people at Slalom thought it was cool. So like they were some of the first subscribers. But then the types of companies that I was interested in investing in were like founder-led companies. So companies that were still, even like public companies that were still led by the founder. And I had seen this Lambda School thing pop up on Twitter, and it was still really small. They had like raised some funding from some venture capitalists, and I thought the idea was cool, and reached out to the founder. His name's Austin Lieberman, on Twitter, and said, hey, I've got this podcast, which I had done a couple episodes at the time, where I like to interview founders of companies, and actually like had him on the podcast. And then a year later or whatever, they did another round of funding and opened up. None of the jobs at that time, they were all like engineering related. So I was not qualified for any of them because I'm not a software developer or an engineer. They did another round of funding, and they had these career coach positions open up. And that was something that I felt like I was qualified to do through my ability to just work with people and communicate, and the training and development stuff that I had done in the military. And I thought I had a lot of empathy for like the students, because they were trying to just transition from outside of software development world into software development. And so I had transitioned from the military into the civilian world. So again, like when I was interviewing, I'd like shared that experience. So there's things you can find that relate to jobs that you never would have thought. But when I was in the interview process, like one of the ways after I had interviewed Austin Allred, I followed Lambda School. When you follow companies on social media, it's really easy to find employees that work for them, because they're usually like tagging the account. So I had followed some other people and just had been like interacting with them a little bit. And then when those jobs opened up, I just like DM'd those people that I had these like 1 or 2 conversations with and said, hey, I really love my job now, but like I need to make this move and blah, blah, blah. So the newsletter started in 2018. I ended up interviewing somebody that like I had no idea I would even have a potential opportunity with. And then like a year or 2 later, an opportunity opened up. And then because I had been doing this newsletter and this podcast that literally like not that many people listen to, it led directly to that opportunity at Lambda School. And then, the job I'm doing now was advertised on Twitter like the application was advertised on Twitter, and then I applied on Twitter. So again, it's like, just hitting home, like, hey, if you're still in or getting out or whatever, it's like, consider alternate ways of building a network and having a resume. And it's something you can work on in your part-time about a passion while you're still on active duty, versus like thinking, because the other thought was like, oh man, when I get off active duty, I got to go back and get an MBA and spend 2 years in school and $100,000 or whatever. That's intimidating, Yeah.
Yeah. I would sit here and plug Twitter all day with how much value I have gained personally from it, and just what I see it has given other people. And it's crazy, because I spend all this time online and talking and meeting people and doing things like this. And then I try to tell my friends and stuff about Twitter, and they just look at me like I'm speaking language. And I'm like, you have no idea what you're missing. And I don't know, Twitter's a powerful platform.
Well, I think to a large majority of people, I just had this conversation with some of my managers at my job, where they were talking about something, and I said, oh, I just saw this article on Twitter about that. And they're, oh, you're on Twitter, but what are you tweeting about your lunch? And I think to a large majority of people that have never used it or used it professionally, that's what it's about. Like that's what they think it's about, is people sharing what they ate for lunch or, whatever, when in reality, I think it is a very, very powerful tool when it comes to networking and being able to connect with people that are either doing what you want to do or share the same interests or whatever. And I think that it's, for lack of a better term, I think it's really slept on as far as getting you connected with people.
Yeah.
It's kind of got this stigma to it where it's for teenagers sharing their thoughts on this new t-shirt, when it could be used as a very powerful professional networking tool.
Yeah. And that's where it's like, you got to know where you're at and like what people's opinions are, and then like be mindful about what conversations you have at work, what you don't have at work,
Sure.
And just be thoughtful about all that stuff. But people are definitely getting more open to it.
Well, and I think generally too, I don't know why or what the science is behind it, but it seems like people's guards are down a little bit. It's hard to jump into somebody's email inbox, but for some reason, sending them a DM on Twitter is like way lower stakes. That's how I landed one of the jobs that I have. I talked to you about doing this interview. It's all of those things. So
yeah.
I guess to wrap up here, unless you have anything, Tim, what would be some advice that you have for some, like, just maybe general blanket advice to somebody that's in and either thinking about staying in or getting out, or maybe somebody who's just recently transitioned You've got a really successful track record, persevered through some really, really crazy stuff. What can people learn from you?
I think whether you're just starting in the military or potentially thinking about getting out or whatever, it's really helpful to spend like whatever amount of extra time, maybe it's an hour a week or whatever on the weekends or just whatever. There's like, everybody's got some free time, even if they don't think they have free time. Learning about things outside of the military, whatever that passion is. For me, it was like business and investing. I saw direct correlations with like how that could make my family more financially secure and take stress off of our lives, which it did. And then it opened up like opportunities to where we have freedom over how we spend our time and eventually like career decisions and stuff. And if it doesn't turn into another job and you stay in the military for 20 years, I truly think it made me a better leader in the military because I was just more knowledgeable about business and kind of like what was going on in the world outside of, directly in the military. And I think it's important to be like well-read and well-versed in things. Right. So there's that. And then if you're thinking about transitioning, it's just like, yeah, get unconventional with it, take ownership of it and go the extra mile. And put in the extra effort, like that really matters to people. Don't sell yourself short, be creative. And again, like creative as in on your resume, don't lie, but just be creative with the way you term things. Be creative with the way that you apply. And then, yeah. And if you're like having conversations and potentially hiring veterans, it's like, just realize that they have a lot of skills that might not be reflected directly on their resume. Like I got asked a question, with the consulting company, it's like, how are you going to, help us? Like, because essentially they have to get, as a consultant, you have to get hired by the firm's customers to then go do like a consulting job there. Like they have to be, because you work for the consulting company, but then you're going to go do a project. So the customer like interviews you to make sure you're a good fit. And so they've got to be able to like sell you in a way to like their customers. Right. And so like the question was, well, how are you going to like, how am I going to like sell your experience? Because I didn't have any direct consulting experience. And that was like a really hard question to answer when I didn't really know how to answer the question. And so it's just like finding value in those intangible skills that might not fit a resume directly. And other than that, it's like, I mean, my biggest thing is like, just get out there and build some type of following on social media. Maybe it's LinkedIn, email newsletter, whatever. And you don't have to be an expert in anything. A lot of people love the whole documenting your journey and documenting learning something. That's my experience.
Yeah, I think people really enjoy finding or seeing somebody that has gone through something similar to them, and it gives them some kind of shared experience, something to identify with, and encourages them in a way that, oh, maybe I could have that, or maybe I could kind of pursue that. And honestly, that's exactly why we're doing this podcast. So this has been really great. Austin, where can people go to follow along with you? Maybe your newsletter, Twitter, whatever you want to plug.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Lieberman Austin, Lieberman Austin, Lieberman Austin, and then my email newsletter is austin.substack.com.
Awesome, dude. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, man. This has been awesome. Yeah,
thanks for having me, guys. Sorry if I seemed distracted at the end. I was trying to like follow up on some work stuff here. Yeah, it was great. Thanks for what you're doing. And we'll have to do it again sometime if you want to like get smarter and learn from an Air Force person instead of just Navy people,
Well, with that, we will not have you back on.
Yeah. All right,
yeah,
thanks, guys.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, Austin.